In the late 1960s, the peaceful communities of Northern California were shattered by a series of brutal attacks that would launch one of the most infamous manhunts in American history. A killer stalked lovers' lanes and secluded areas, attacking young couples without warning or mercy. But what transformed these horrific crimes into an enduring mystery wasn't just the randomness of the violence, it was what came after. Letters arrived at newspaper offices, taunting police and threatening more bloodshed. They contained cryptic ciphers, bizarre symbols, and a chilling signature, a crossed circle that resembled the sight of a rifle. The sender called himself the Zodiac, and he wasn't just taking lives, he was building a legend. Tonight, we delve into the shadows of one of America's most notorious unsolved cases. We'll trace the Zodiac's bloody path through California, examine the clues he deliberately left behind, and explore why, despite decades of investigation, the true identity of this calculating killer remains hidden in plain sight. This is the story of the Zodiac Killer, a tale of terror, obsession, and a mystery that continues to haunt us more than half a century later. Santa Barbara. The possible precursor story may begin earlier than most accounts suggest. On June 4, 1963, in Santa Barbara County, high school seniors Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards decided to spend their senior ditch day sunbathing on a secluded beach near Gaviota State Park. When they failed to return home, Robert's father went searching and made a horrific discovery: their bodies lying together inside a crumbling shack. The young couple had been bound with pre-cut lengths of rope. They had apparently tried to escape, but were shot multiple times. With a .22 caliber weapon, Robert 11 times and Linda 9 times. The killer then dragged their bodies to the shack and attempted, unsuccessfully, to burn the evidence. At the time, investigators had few leads, and the case remained unsolved. It wasn't until 1972 that the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department noted similarities to the Zodiac's methods. The beach killer used Winchester Western Super X ammunition, the exact same type the Zodiac would later use in his confirmed attacks. The pattern of binding victims and the targeting of a young couple in a secluded location would also become hallmarks of the Zodiac's approach. While never officially confirmed as a Zodiac crime, this attack foreshadowed the terror to come. Riverside. The disputed connection. 3 years later, on October 30th, 1966, another murder occurred that would later be linked to the Zodiac. 18-year-old Sherry Josephine Bates, a student at Riverside City College, left a note for her father. Dad went to the RCC library. The next morning, her Volkswagen Beetle was found abandoned in the library parking lot, and her body was discovered between two nearby houses. Sherry Jo had been brutally stabbed multiple times, and her throat was slashed. The crime scene yielded several clues: a men's Timex watch, a military boot print, and hairs in dried blood on the victim's hand. Her purse remained intact, and there was no evidence of sexual assault. 1 month after the murder, both the local newspaper and police received typewritten letters titled "The Confession from Someone Claiming to Be the Killer." The author wrote, "Chillingly, Miss Bates was stupid. She went to the slaughter like a lamb," adding, "I am not sick. I am insane." In April 1967, additional handwritten letters arrived at the newspaper, police department, and to Joseph Bates himself, stating simply, "Bates had to die. There will be more." These notes were signed with a symbol resembling the letter Z. Years later, when the Zodiac's reign of terror was in full swing, document examiner Sherwood Moriel concluded that the Zodiac was responsible for the notes linked to the Bates case. When this connection was publicly revealed by San Francisco Chronicle reporter Paul Avery, the Zodiac sent a letter to the Los Angeles Times seemingly confirming the theory, writing, "I do have to give them credit for stumbling across my Riverside activity, but they are only finding the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there." Despite this apparent confession, Riverside police eventually rejected the Zodiac theory and focused on another suspect, a jilted former lover of Bates. However, When DNA testing became available in the late 1990s, samples from the crime scene failed to match. The suspect, who denied any involvement, the Riverside connection remains disputed to this day, with some investigators firmly believing it was an early Zodiac attack and others considering it unrelated. Lake Herman Road, the first official victim's first murders officially attributed to the Zodiac occurred on December 20th, 1968, just 5 nights before Christmas. High school students Betty Lou Jensen, 16, and David Faraday, 17, were on their first official date. They had promised Betty Lou's parents they'd be home by 11 p.m. Shortly after that time, passing motorists noticed their Rambler parked at a Lover's Lane spot along Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California. Moments later, another driver discovered 2 seemingly lifeless bodies on the side of the road. Police arrived to find Betty Lou dead with 5 bullet wounds in her back. David lay next to the car with a bullet wound to his head, still breathing but mortally wounded. The crime scene told a disturbing story. Bullet holes in the car's roof and back window suggested the killer had fired warning shots to force the teenagers out of the vehicle. Shell casings recovered at the scene identified the ammunition as Winchester Western Super X, copper-coated the same type used in the Santa Barbara killings. Ballistic evidence indicated the murder weapon was a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol, possibly a J.C. Higgins Model 80, with no apparent motive. Investigators believe that teenagers were random targets killed by a stranger. At this point, the case appeared to be a tragic but isolated incident. There was no way to know that this was just the beginning of a terror campaign that would soon have a name: Blue Rock Springs Park. The pattern continued. Nearly 7 months passed before the killer struck again. On July 4, 1969, 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin, a wife, mother, and popular waitress at a Vallejo restaurant, picked up her friend 19-year-old Michael Mago. They drove to the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park, about 4 miles from the Lake Herman Road murder site. Michael later told police that another vehicle pulled into the lot around midnight, left briefly, then returned minutes later. The driver exited the car, approached with a bright light, and without warning, opened fire with a 9mm handgun. Michael was shot in the jaw, shoulder, and leg. Darlene was hit multiple times. At 12:40 a.m., a man called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone at a gas station. In a low, monotonous voice, he stated, "I want to report a murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." Darlene died en route to the hospital. Michael, despite serious injuries, survived and would later become the only living person to have seen the Zodiac's face. This attack marked a significant escalation. Not only had the killer changed weapons from a .22 to a 9mm, but he had also made his first contact with authorities, linking the current crime to the previous murders. The killer was no longer content to remain anonymous. He wanted recognition for his crimes. The first communications. Then a month after the Blue Rock Springs attack, 3 nearly identical letters arrived at 3 different newspapers: the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. Each was postmarked July 31st, 1969. The letters claimed responsibility for the shootings and provided details about the victims, weapons, number of shots fired, and the brand of ammunition used, information that hadn't been released to the public. Each letter also contained 1/3 of a cipher that the writer demanded be published by August 1st, threatening, "If you do not print this cipher by the afternoon of Friday, 1 of August 69, I will go on a kill rampage Friday night. I will cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again, until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend." The newspapers complied, publishing the ciphers. On August 4th, the Examiner received another letter, this one signed the Zodiac. It was the first time the killer had used this name, which would soon become infamous. The 408-character cipher was broken within a week by Donald and Betty Harden, a school teacher and his wife. The decrypted message read in part, I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is they when I die I will be reborn in paradise, and I have killed will become my slaves. The message continued with a refusal to reveal his identity, claiming that collecting slaves for his afterlife was more important than notoriety in this one. The misspellings were numerous, either due to the killer's poor education or a deliberate attempt to disguise his intelligence. With these letters, the Zodiac had transformed from an anonymous murderer to a public menace who communicated directly with the media and, by extension, the terrified public. He had given himself a name and established a pattern of taunting authorities that would continue for years. On September 27, 1969, college students Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, were enjoying a peaceful afternoon on the shores of Lake Berryessa, about 30 miles north of Napa. Their tranquility was shattered when a man approached them, wearing one of the most disturbing disguises in criminal history, a black executioner-style hood, with a white crossed circle sewn onto the chest. The man claimed he was an escaped convict who needed money and a car to flee to Mexico. He produced a gun and had Brian and Cecilia lie face down on the ground, where he bound their wrists with pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline, a detail reminiscent of the Santa Barbara attack 6 years earlier. Without warning, the hooded figure plunged a large knife into Brian's back 6 times. He then turned to Cecilia, stabbing her 10 times as she desperately fought for her life. After the brutal attack, the man walked calmly to Brian's car and used a pen to draw his crossed circle symbol on the door, adding the dates and locations of his previous attacks, along with the current date, time, and the notation by knife at 7:40 p.m. A man called the Napa Police Department to report a double murder. The caller described Brian's car, directed police to the crime scene, and confessed, "I'm the one who did it." Police traced the call to a payphone at a car wash in Napa. Brian Hartnell survived his wounds, but Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later. The Lake Berryessa attack represented a disturbing evolution in the Zodiac's methods. He had abandoned his previous strategy of shooting victims from a distance in favor of a more intimate, theatrical approach. The costume, the elaborate binding, and the careful documentation of his crime on the car door all suggested a killer who was growing more confident and more invested in creating a terrifying persona. Just 2 weeks after Lake Berryessa, on October 11, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time in the heart of San Francisco. Taxi driver Paul Stine, 29, picked up a passenger at the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets in downtown San Francisco. The destination was originally given as Washington and Maple Streets in Presidio Heights, a wealthy neighborhood. At approximately 9:55 p.m., Stine's cab stopped at the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets, 1 block beyond the requested destination. What happened next was witnessed by 3 teenagers watching from across the street. The passenger shot Stine in the head, then was seen wiping down the cab's interior and exterior surfaces. Before removing a piece of Stine's shirt, the killer then walked away calmly toward the Presidio, a park-like military installation. The teenagers called the police, describing the suspect as a white male, 25 to 30 years old, with a crew cut, standing about 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 9. In a critical error, the police dispatcher mistakenly broadcast that the suspect was a black male, causing responding officers to overlook a white man matching the correct description, walking just a few blocks from the crime scene. 3 days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received another letter from the Zodiac. Inside was a piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt, proof that the writer was indeed the killer. The letter mocked the police for failing to catch him. "I am the murderer of the taxi driver. over by Washington St. plus Maple St. last night to prove. This here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. I am the same man who did in the people in the North Bay area. The Zodiac went on to threaten school children. School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire plus then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. This attack marked another significant shift. The Zodiac had moved from isolated lovers' lanes to an urban setting. He had changed his victim profile from couples to a lone male, and most disturbingly, he had escalated his threats to include mass murder of children, a threat that would terrorize the Bay Area for months to come. Over the next few years, the Zodiac continued to send letters to newspapers, police departments, and even private citizens. Each communication revealed more about his disturbed psychology while keeping investigators guessing about his true identity. On November 8, 1969, he mailed a card containing another cipher, this one with 340 characters. Unlike the first cipher, this one would remain unsolved for over 50 years, until December 2020, when 3 amateur codebreakers finally cracked it. The message read in part, "I hope you are having lots of fun and trying to catch me. I am not. Afraid of the gas chamber because IT will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me." On November 9, 1969, the Zodiac sent a 7-page letter to the San Francisco Chronicle. In it, he claimed responsibility for the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, writing, "I shall no longer announce to anyone when I commit my murders. They shall look like routine robberies, killings of anger, and a few fake accidents, etc." In a letter dated April 20, 1970, the Zodiac included a diagram of a bomb he claimed he would use on a school bus. He wrote, "I was swamped out by the rain, but shall get back to work now that the rain has stopped." This letter also contained a fragment of verse from the Mikado, a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, with the words, "I've got to punish all those children until they're good and dead." The letters continued sporadically through 1971, becoming increasingly erratic and sometimes containing references to murders that could not be verified or linked to the Zodiac. A letter received on January 29, 1974, praised The Exorcist as the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen. This is generally considered to be the last authenticated Zodiac letter. In total, the Zodiac is believed to have sent at least 20 letters and cards. Through these communications, he maintained a psychological hold over the Bay Area, keeping his case in the public eye and taunting the authorities who could not catch him. The Zodiac investigation became one of the most extensive manhunts in California history, involving multiple police departments, the FBI, and countless man-hours. Yet despite the killer's many communications and several eyewitness accounts, he remained elusive. Michael Mago, who survived the Blue Rock Springs attack, described his assailant as a white male, about 26 to 30 years old, 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 9, with light brown curly hair, wearing glasses. Brian Hartnell, who survived Lake Berryessa, could only describe the killer's voice and build, as the man wore a hood throughout the encounter. The teenagers who witnessed the Stine murder provided similar descriptions to Mago's, adding that the suspect had a crew cut. Police developed composite sketches based on these descriptions, but they never led to a definitive identification. The investigation was further complicated by the thousands of tips that poured in from the public, each requiring follow-up. Over the years, numerous suspects have been investigated. Among the most prominent was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender. Allen became the primary suspect after being named by Don Chaney, an acquaintance who told police that Allen had discussed his desire to kill people, attach a flashlight to a gun for night shooting, and call himself Zodiac. Allen owned the same type of shoes that left prints at the Lake Berryessa crime scene. He lived in Vallejo near the first 2 attack sites. He wore a Zodiac brand watch with the crossed circle symbol, and he was ambidextrous, which was significant because handwriting experts had noted that the Zodiac's letters appeared to be written by someone trying to disguise their handwriting by using their non-dominant hand. Despite these circumstantial Connections: no definitive evidence linked Allen to the crimes. He was interviewed multiple times, and his home was searched, but no smoking gun was ever found. Allen died of a heart attack in 1992, taking any secrets he might have had to the grave. Other suspects have emerged over the years. Some researchers have pointed to Bruce Davis, a member of the Manson family. Others have suggested Richard Gajkowski, a journalist whose appearance matched the composite sketches and who had knowledge of ciphers from his military service. Still others have named Lawrence Kane, a man who knew Darlene Ferrin and was later identified by Kathleen Johns, a woman who claimed to have been abducted by the Zodiac in March 1970. In 2002, the San Francisco Police Department obtained partial DNA profiles from saliva on the stamps and envelope flaps of several Zodiac letters. This DNA evidence has been used to eliminate some suspects, but has not yet led to a positive identification. The investigation continues to this day, with new techniques being applied to old evidence, and amateur sleuths continuing to develop theories about the killer's identity. The Zodiac case has left an indelible mark on American culture. It has inspired books, movies, television shows, and countless internet forums dedicated to solving the mystery. The 2007 film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher and based on Robert Graysmith's books, brought renewed attention to the case and is considered one of the most accurate portrayals of the investigation. The Zodiac's ciphers have become legendary in cryptography circles. The breaking of the 340-character cipher in 2020 by three amateur codebreakers David Oranchuk, Sam Blake, and Jarl Van Eyck was hailed as a major achievement in the field and brought the case back into the headlines more than 50 years after the murders. The case has also influenced how law enforcement approaches serial killers. The Zodiac was one of the first killers to actively communicate with the media and police, creating a template that would be followed by other notorious criminals like the BTK killer and the Unabomber. For the families of the victims, the lack of closure has been a continuing source of pain. While some have found ways to move forward, the absence of justice remains a wound that cannot fully heal. More than 5 decades after the Zodiac's confirmed killings, many questions remain unanswered. Who was the Zodiac Killer? Despite numerous suspects and years of investigation, his identity remains unknown. How many people did he actually kill? The Zodiac claimed to have murdered 37 people, but only 5 deaths and 2 injuries are officially attributed to him. Did he stop killing, or did he change his methods as he threatened to do? The authenticated Zodiac communications ceased in 1974, but the killer was never caught. Are there other Zodiac communications that remain undiscovered? Some researchers believe the killer may have continued to send letters that were either not recognized as authentic or were never made public. Will modern technology finally solve the case? Advances in DNA analysis and digital forensics offer hope that the Zodiac's identity might someday be revealed. The story of the Zodiac Killer is more than just a tale of unsolved murders. It's a narrative about the limits of justice, the dark fascination of the public with notorious criminals, and the lasting trauma inflicted on communities by random violence. The Zodiac created a persona that transcended his crimes, transforming himself from a mere murderer into a cultural boogeyman. Through his letters, ciphers, and calculated public communications, he ensured that his legacy would endure long after his active killing spree ended. For investigators, the case represents both a frustrating failure and a continuing challenge. For the families of victims, it represents a wound that can never fully heal without justice. And for the public, it represents one of the great unsolved mysteries of American crime history. As we look back on the Zodiac's reign of terror, we're reminded that behind the sensational headlines and cultural fascination lies a simple, tragic truth. Real people lost their lives to a killer who has, thus far, escaped accountability. Their stories, not the Zodiac's, deserve to be remembered. The cipher that couldn't silence justice may remain partially unsolved, but the pursuit of truth continues. Somewhere, perhaps, there's a final piece of evidence waiting to be discovered, a connection yet to be made, or a witness who has remained silent until now. Until then, The shadow of the Zodiac remains a reminder of a killer who wrote himself into history, with blood and fear, but whose true identity remains hidden in plain sight. The case of the Zodiac Killer remains open,